Welcome trainers to another video. Did you know that your favorite Pokemon game sucks? I don't necessarily think so, but someone does, and I'm here to show you that the internet hates it. We're going super far back in time, and here are my historical findings on what negative controversy has plagued every single Pokemon generation. Let me know if you want a part 2 on Generation 6 through 10. Also, no hate to any of the negative reviewers, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. Don't go hating on these people, please. Red and Blue came out in 1998, so what was wrong with it? Now, keep in mind, these are all basically opinions of individuals who are now probably in vastly different stages of life. No hate to anyone, it's just fascinating to see opinions from as long as 20 years ago. The time was October 18th, 2006. HonestGamers.com made a very fascinating review of Pokemon Red and Blue, and safe to say it isn't beaming. Here's how it starts. Now, about a decade or so ago, this review would be gushing with praise. Chances are that it very well could have been the most positive review of anything to grace the internet. It would have had its head so far up the rear end of Nintendo that the text you are reading just now would be brown, not just the plain old black in front of you see here. A great start for sure. So, what's the problem with Red and Blue, you ask? Well, this reviewer notes that it's a very basic RPG compared to many other games in its genre. Leveling up Pokemon is too much of a grind, and you can't collect every Pokemon in a single version of the game. They also note the sheer amount of bugs. However, don't fault the game for them, for some reason. If you want to know what I feel about Red and Blue, I made an entire video on it comparing it to other RPGs of its time on the Game Boy. Go check it out. Here's another excerpt from the same article. Pokemon is an extremely basic RPG which relies on gimmicky features and worthless trades. Its impact and popularity in the late 90s was due to its commercial success as a cartoon. The actual root of Pokemon's popularity is a rotten and broken one which shrouded in praise due to its cult status and charm. However, if one was to examine further as we have done, you'll find that this is nothing but an extremely monotonous and boring RPG that did little substantially to compete with other RPGs, but simply relied on a gimmick. A 2 out of 5 stars was given as a rating by this guy. Yikes, that's low. It's not only this anti-fan, though it has an issue with Red and Blue, so too did someone on Spiceworks.com. In 2019. 1998 to 2019 is 21 years apart, and now 28 years. Wow. So this person has a less scathing review and more of a disappointed one. The main gripe is actually the fact that the series has gone on too long and should have died way sooner. It's a nice game, they start, but I feel it's a dead horse flog. Commenters mention how they don't like the version exclusives either, and finally, for Red and Blue, a Redditor in a thread titled "Pokemon Red and Blue are by far the worst games in the series" complained mainly about the fact that they are buggy and pretty unbalanced. This thread was made in 2024. The comments make a good point though, with one deleted user explaining, "Shakespeare was groundbreaking in his time, but now the plays feel overly tropey and predictable because Shakespeare literally created the tropes." Same with Gen 1. And yeah, honestly, I kinda agree with that guy. Red and Blue are cited to having tons of bugs, being unbalanced, and having the gimmicks of exclusives feel pretty predatory for the time, but honestly, it was kinda hard to find negative reviews in the first place. And that's a common theme here. On to Gen 2. Now, I'm fascinated by the distaste of Gold and Silver. To be honest, I hear it commonly praised as to being the best games in the series. This is mostly due to the whole 2 explorable regions thing, but there are a decent amount of Gen 2 haters here. Gold and Silver came out in October of 2000, for context. For starters, I found a YouTube video from 16 years ago about how Gold and Silver are overrated. In the nostalgic 2009 neon background, this hyper-specific font style, this YouTuber barely puts out any legit criticism of the game. They only seem to dislike the fans of Gold and Silver glazing it. Oh my gosh, does the description say pwned? Put this in the Library of Congress, this is an ancient masterpiece. Bro even called out another user and repeatedly dogs on him the whole time. He mentions how this other YouTuber hasn't even played Diamond and Pearl but hates it anyway, and that's his justification for disliking Gold and Silver? Also throwing shade on FF7 and Square Enix here, I don't think the Final Fantasy community can forgive that one. Here's verbatim what he said in one part, just to set the tone. The Gold and Silver fan Nintendo for not making a remake, and they want them to only cater to Gold and Silver remakes. He goes on to say, Nintendo and Game Freak are smart enough not to milk Gold and Silver so they can move on to their next Pokémon game, so they won't end up like Final Fantasy VII and Square Enix. I don't know what to tell this guy. This video came out in March 2009, and, well, Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out in September 2009. Pwned? Gold and Silver was terribly designed by a deleted Reddit user. A thread created in 2021 explains, the most overrated game in the entire franchise was easily Gold and Silver, with the garbage AI, terrible roster available mostly from Kanto, and the day one really bad level curve. That's honestly the TLDR of their arguments. They wish the level curve was more typical as to not over-level too fast and then be under-leveled at the very end. They also complain a lot about the Pokemon choice, how the best Pokemon are kinda locked toward the end. How interesting. Moving on, because this one's kinda self-explanatory. You thought Heart Gold and Soul Silver were safe? Did you? I mean, they improved the originals by quite a bit, but nah. Here's another Reddit thread credited 3 years ago. Again, no hate to any of these people, by the way. Wanna know why Heart Gold and Soul Silver are horrible? Just played Pokemon Soul Silver for the first time, and it was one of the most boring games I've played. The level curve was bad, too grindy. The map was so bland in comparison to Scarlet and Sword. The game's rival was boring. Thank God Game Freak improved rivals later, with Hop being a personal favorite. Honestly, why do you guys think this game is so good when later games make so many better quality of life improvements? Okay, out of all of the rivals you chose Hop. He's a pushover and would apologize to you if you stole his lunch money. But he is really sweet, I'll give him that. Honestly, the comments do a well enough job at clapping back. They point out that the actual criticisms of the OP aren't actually necessarily the problem, but it's just the way they go about it that is. The quality of life improvements are an upgrade for some, but not all. And even if they were across the board, the comments argued that OP was advocating for not playing older games because the newer games just had more quality of life improvements. One commenter expressed the love Zelda fans have for the original, or Ocarina of Time. And if someone played Breath of the Wild, it would just be silly to say that it's pointless to play the previous two just because they didn't have the same quality of life improvements. I do agree with this. Some people prefer a challenge, and that's why they go backwards to a time without XP share. Okay, on to Hoenn. We all know where this one goes. Let me just get it out of the way and say, if your favorite is the hit 2002 Pokemon game Ruby and Sapphire, it shouldn't be. I mean, it did only get a 7.8 out of 10. In all seriousness, we actually have a cool Reddit thread for this one. It asks specifically what people disliked about the original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald games. The comments are pretty enlightening. There were too many social aspects in a time before the internet could make these aspects accessible or particularly enjoyable. The different bikes were cool but annoying since you had to go all the way back to Mauville, and the Pokemon spread was kinda lame, considering there were way too many water types and not enough ice, ghost, or fire types. From a website titled Pokemon World Report, we have why Ruby and Sapphire are the worst. The first reason is actually really fascinating. Remember when everyone was mad at Gen 5 for not having Pokemon from different regions? Or when Gen 8 decided not to allow previous transfers from past games for a lot of Pokemon? We'll get more to these later. Well, it started with Generation 3. Justin, the OP, didn't quite like how he couldn't trade up his Mewtwo to the current generation, nor that there was a limited selection of previous Pokemon in this new generation game. He hated the new designs at the time, specifically citing Silcoon and Cascoon, and the most heartbreaking point, my Pokemon love died shortly after Ruby and Sapphire released. It wasn't until Fire, Red, and Leaf Green came out that my passion for the series returned. I got to go back to the best region in Pokemon, Kanto, and catch all of my favorites all over again. I never looked back to Ruby and Sapphire. It was all forward from there. I'm really sorry, but in my opinion, this take is just funny. Only after playing a remake of Gen 1 did he regain his love back for Pokemon. So Gen 1. My lukewarm take is that if people like the Pokemon they like, that's fine. but to expect them to be catchable in every single game is silly, considering there are new regions and stories to tell. But I can't say that for Gen 1 fans because they always get what they want eventually. And finally, for Hoenn, we'll look at GameSpot thread from 14 years ago. This one is titled, "Do you guys believe that Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald are the worst in the series?" They cite the water, of course, and the personal preference in music and graphics. They were horrible, and they tried too hard to add in little gimmicks and features to diversify the game's content, trick house, catchphrases, etc., but did not focus on the game's Pokemon battles in terms of making them challenging and more difficult. They also have a little poll, which, for most of the votes, they say that there was too much water in the games and that's why they didn't like them. But the second most cited reason is no day and no night cycle that was available in, Gold and Silver. It is kind of interesting how Pokemon games tend to add a really cool mechanic and then the very next generation take it away, but who knows? What do you guys think? If you're liking or seething at the video so far, feel free to interact any way you see fit. I figured it would be cool to go back into internet history and see what people had to say on these games. Do you agree with any of these? Do you disagree? Now then, for the second half of Generation 3, let's take a deep look into Fire Red and Leaf Green. Fire Red and Leaf Green came out in 2004. These games are hearty remakes of the first generation, so they were being absolutely glazed, right? 100%. However, I did find a couple of interesting critiques regarding their existence. An article from Eurogamer in 2004, mind you, doesn't have much to say on how awful it is, but instead what we've been noticing for decades, how bland it's becoming. By the way, I was one at this point, so it's really fascinating to see that people have cared about this franchise for so long. One thought-provoking line is this: veteran trainers, on the other hand, need to ask themselves if they want more of the same again. If not, then perhaps it's time for Nintendo to move on to pastures new. The article details how Fire Red and Leaf Green are the same games with the same plot and the same progression we've been having for years at that point, but admits to a new player it would be addicting and fun. Ultimately though, to answer their question 2 decades later, yes, apparently we do all enjoy the same stuff over and over. If it ain't broken, why fix it? But in my opinion, trainers, I'm glad they're changing it. At least a little bit. The other Fire Red and Leaf Green article I want to discuss comes from Reddit. 9 months ago, actually. OP claims to have played Fire Red and Leaf Green a total of 14 times and thinks they are both worse than the other Generation 3 games and their originals. The level curve is said to be nuts. On one hand, you're underleveled for the Elite Four without grinding, and on the other, you're too overleveled for the rest of the towns and cities if you choose to defeat every other trainer. They also complain about the amount of freedom you get after defeating Celadon City and the fact that Pokemon balancing is lackluster. The comments, of course, are full of people arguing the opposite, but this is really fascinating to see. Okay, skipping ahead a few years, we'll move on to 2006 and 2007, where we finally get to see the era of the DS. Diamond, Pearl, and the famous Platinum. This by far was the most difficult to research for this video. So many people put Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum on a pedestal, and honestly for a pretty good reason. It's not my favorite generation, but Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are extremely solid games with many well-designed mons and incredible music. My first ever shiny was actually in Pearl. I caught a level 4 Shinx and named him Simba. Okay, anyway, Diamond and Pearl suck. Most of what I'm finding regarding Diamond and Pearl is the speed of everything. Walking, battles, animations. People keep complaining that it's impossibly slow. People also hated Dawn for some reason. Honestly, I could really only find a couple genuine hate posts, and this one is the most on brand. Another GameSpot thread, we have Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and Platinum are the worst Pokemon games. It starts off solid with complaints such as not enough new Pokemon or not enough typing variety, but then they say this: Pokemon can be affected by any status type regardless as to whether it makes sense or not. Sorry, Game Freak, but I don't think that my Graveler, a giant rock, should be able to be burned. While a cool gimmick in theory, that's just not how it works. There is so little Gen 4 hate, I'm astonished. Honestly, the only consistency I can find is that Diamond and Pearl suck because Platinum is just that much better. Finally, for the video, the big guns. The one that everyone loved to hate, Generation 5, Black and White. complains from the fact that the older Pokemon were never catchable to there not being enough fire types to the fact that Garbodor and Vanillix simply exist, Gen 5 games were, in my opinion, the most overhated games of all Pokemon history. But why were they hated? Let's find out. Is it just me, or do Black and White suck a lot? One Redditor begins. This game seems sluggish. The game is pixelated and has these awkward field of views in several routes. There seems to be a decent amount of critique regarding the pixelation of the graphics and lower quality. Also, I heard that people didn't like the 3D backgrounds when it first came out, but others still were annoyed that the complete jump to 3D didn't happen yet. Can't please everyone, I guess. There's a cool video I saw while researching the Black and White hatred by a dude named Unwavering on YouTube. He brings up a really solid point regarding the fact that the region-locked Pokédex combined with the wild success of Generation 4 most likely caused a lot of people anger and discomfort, since they couldn't bring back a lot of their old favorites. He also explored grievances regarding the Pokémon designs and level-up caps, citing Hydreigon and Volcarona as especially egregious. I recommend his video, check it out. But do you want to know something really interesting? I'm not finding a whole lot of genuine hatred for these games. In fact, the major reviewers are all 8s and above, 5 of them being 9s, except for GameSpot, which gives it a 7.5. So where did all the hate come from? I low-key feel like it was a very vocal minority because aside from the same tired complaints of the Pokédex and hatred for some of the designs, I can't really find other criticism. And in fact, I'm kind of finding the opposite. A lot of commenters explain that it was actually well received when it first came out. And as for Black and White 2, well, people just believed it was a step down in all aspects. The new locations and different scenery made people confused because how could the region change that much in 3 years? Same goes for the addition of older Pokemon back into the ecosystems again. For some people, it makes little logical sense. And before I leave it off, have you ever heard of the Pokemon cycle? I'm gonna make an entire video based on it because the phenomenon is so fascinating, but essentially, it's the idea that fans of Pokemon hate the newer generations, just to turn around and express immense fondness for them once the next new generation comes. I am not immune to this by any means, however, it is fascinating to look back on, for sure. Want to see a part 2? Let me know. Thank you for watching, and keep training.